No one noticed the boy at first, not because he was hidden, but because everyone had learned how to look past him. The glass tower had trained them well, teaching eyes to aim upward toward titles, screens, and corner offices, never downward toward silence, and certainly never toward a child waiting alone in a wheelchair at the edge of a world that never slowed down for him. If stories like this make you pause, if you believe small moments can expose big truths, go ahead and like and subscribe as you read on. You'll know by the end of this part whether your instincts were right. The building was called Hale Dynamics, a 46-story monument of steel and glass planted in downtown Chicago. And every night when the last executives finally abandoned their ergonomic chairs and glowing monitors, Ethan Brooks arrived with a mop, a badge that opened only the doors no one else wanted to use, and the quiet determination of a man who had learned to endure without being seen. Ethan was American in the most unremarkable way possible. Born in Indiana, raised on factory schedules and school lunches, taught early that work was something you did even when it hurt, and especially when no one thanked you for it. And at 39, widowed with a 10-year-old daughter waiting at home, he had mastered the art of shrinking himself so the world wouldn't push back. He cleaned Hale Dynamics 6 nights a week, starting with the executive floors where the carpet felt too soft under his boots, and the air smelled faintly of citrus wipes and expensive cologne. And it was there, near the west-facing windows where the city lights stretched like a second sky, that he first began to notice Noah Hale. Noah was 9 years old, small for his age, his sandy blonde hair always neatly combed as if someone had tried very hard to make order out of circumstances that refused it. And he sat in a wheelchair that looked more engineered than medical, sleek and dark with padded armrests and wheels that barely made a sound against the polished floor. Ethan noticed him because janitors notice what others don't. The scuff marks that tell you where people pause, the fingerprints that reveal which doors matter, the human patterns left behind after the noise fades. And Noah was always left behind, waiting near the conference rooms while assistants whispered into headsets and executives stepped around him with practiced politeness, smiling the way people smile when they want credit for kindness without spending any of it. The boy was the son of Claire Hale, the CEO, a self-made American executive whose blonde hair and tailored suits had become synonymous with the company's success. A woman praised in magazines for her vision and discipline, for breaking ceilings and never looking back. And yet here was her son, watching security guards pretend not to see him while emails were sent and meetings ran long. Ethan never spoke to Noah at first. He wasn't supposed to, and more importantly, he didn't trust himself to. There was something about children that cracked him open in places he kept carefully sealed, something about the way Noah's hands rested on his lap, fingers tracing invisible patterns that reminded him too much of Lily at home, doing homework at the kitchen table with an empty chair across from her where her mother should have been. Ethan pushed his cart quietly, wiping glass walls etched with mission statements about innovation and inclusion, thinking how strange it was that the words felt louder than the reality. And night after night, he watched Noah's patience thin, not in anger but in resignation, the kind that settles into a person early and stays for life if no one interrupts it. One evening, a rainstorm rattled against the windows, streaking the city into watercolor smears of white and red, and the building felt lonelier than usual, its echoes sharper, its silence heavier, and Ethan found Noah alone near the break area. No assistant, no mother, no phone glowing in his hands, just the quiet hum of vending machines and the distant whir of elevators. The boy didn't cry or complain. He simply waited, eyes fixed on the rain, as if hoping the storm might notice him even if the people didn't. Ethan slowed without meaning to, his mop leaving a damp line on the tile as his attention drifted toward the child. And for a moment he stood there, caught between habit and instinct, between the rules that kept his job safe and the voice inside him that had grown louder since his wife died, the one that whispered that doing nothing could be its own kind of failure. He told himself it wasn't his place, that people like Claire Hale didn't want janitors interacting with their children, that a man in work gloves and a name badge faded from use wasn't part of this world. But Noah turned his head then, just slightly, and their eyes met. And in that brief connection Ethan saw not entitlement or boredom, but a careful hope, the kind that asks without daring to expect. Around them, the building seemed to hold its breath, The corporate slogans on the walls standing mute witness to a moment they could never explain, and Ethan felt the weight of his own invisibility pressing down on him. Years of being overlooked at construction sites, in hospital waiting rooms, at parent-teacher meetings where couples sat together and he sat alone. He thought of Lily again, of how she sometimes asked why grown-ups didn't listen, and how he never quite knew how to answer without breaking something inside her. Noah's gaze flickered toward the chessboard folded neatly beside his chair, then back to Ethan, and though the boy didn't speak yet, the question hovered there, unspoken but unmistakable, daring Ethan to either walk past like everyone else or to stop and acknowledge that someone was there. The elevator dinged somewhere above them. Footsteps echoed faintly, and the moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. As Ethan stood at the edge of a decision he didn't yet understand would change more than just one quiet night in a towering building that had forgotten how to look down. Ethan did not stop all at once so much as he slowed into stillness, the kind that creeps up on a man when his body decides before his mind can catch up, and by the time he realized he had set the mop handle against the wall and turned fully toward the boy, the choice had already been made. Noah's eyes widened just enough to betray surprise, as if adults rarely changed course once they were in motion, and the silence between them thickened with possibility while the rain kept tapping insistently at the glass like a reminder that time was still moving everywhere else. Ethan cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his rough hands, his faded uniform, the smell of cleaning solution that clung to him no matter how hard he scrubbed at home, and he nodded toward the folded board by Noah's chair. "You play?" he asked, his voice low and careful, not wanting to startle something fragile, and Noah's response came instantly, a bright, unguarded "yeah," followed by a rush of words about strategy and openings, and how most people quit halfway through because they didn't like losing to a kid. Ethan almost laughed, catching himself at the last second, because the sound felt too loud for a building that had been designed to swallow human noise, and instead he pulled the chair back from the break table and sat, feeling the oddness of occupying a space he usually cleaned and abandoned, noticing how Noah's hands steadied as he set the pieces in place. The game unfolded slowly, not because Ethan was cautious but because he was outmatched, and he realized within minutes that Noah was brilliant in the quiet way that didn't demand attention, seeing patterns where others saw only moves. And as the boy talked through his reasoning, explaining why certain risks were worth taking, Ethan found himself listening not as an employee or a stranger, but as a father, absorbing the confidence and loneliness braided together in every sentence. Around them, the executive floor existed in suspended animation, lights dimmed, screens dark, and what Ethan did not know was that behind the tinted glass of the corner office, Claire Hale had paused mid-email, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she watched her son laugh. Actually laugh, his shoulders shaking, his voice rising in delight when Ethan blundered into a trap and surrendered as queen. Claire stood there longer than she intended, her reflection overlaying the scene like a ghost, a woman who had mastered every room she entered except the ones that mattered most. And for the first time in weeks, she did not feel relief knowing Noah was nearby, but something sharper, closer to guilt, as she realized how rarely she herself sat where that janitor now sat, fully present, unhurried, engaged. Ethan and Noah played again the next night, and the next, small rituals forming without discussion. Chess on Mondays, cards on Tuesdays, word games Noah invented on Wednesdays, and each time Ethan told himself it would be the last, that someone would notice, that security would intervene, that rules would reassert themselves the way they always did, but no one stopped them, perhaps because no one was trained to look for connection in places labeled maintenance. Ethan learned about Noah's world in fragments, the surgeries that made hallways smell like antiseptic and fear, the friends who drifted away when games required running, the way adults spoke over him as if his chair came with an off switch for his opinions, and in return Noah learned about Lily, about microwave dinners and spelling tests, and the way grief could turn a house quiet even when the lights were on. One night, as Ethan packed up his card, Noah asked a question so casually it took a moment to register, asking if Ethan ever got tired of being ignored, and the honesty of it landed harder than any insult ever had, forcing Ethan to confront a truth he usually kept buried beneath routine. "Sometimes," he answered, just as simply, and Noah nodded like someone who understood too well, and that shared acknowledgement felt like a contract neither of them signed, but both honored. The shift in the building was subtle at first, a change in the way conversations paused when Ethan passed, in the way assistants glanced longer than necessary at the break table, and it culminated one Thursday evening when an email summoned Ethan to Human Resources, the subject line neutral and ominous in its professionalism. He arrived early, hands clasped in front of him, already rehearsing apologies, when the door opened and Claire Hale stepped in, her presence filling the room in a way that made the air feel thinner, and for a split second Ethan saw not the CEO from magazine covers, but a mother with tired eyes and a jaw set in determination. She did not sit immediately, instead looking at him as if measuring something invisible, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady but not unkind. "My son waits for you every night," she said, not accusing, not thanking, simply stating a fact that hung between them, undeniable. Ethan felt heat creep up his neck, the familiar mix of shame and defiance, and he began to explain, words tumbling over each other about not meaning harm, about just playing games, about how Noah asked first, but Claire raised a hand gently, stopping him with a gesture that surprised him more than anger would have. She told him what she had seen through the glass, what she had heard from Noah on the drive home, stories about strategy and jokes, and someone who listened without checking a phone. And as she spoke, her composure cracked just enough for Ethan to glimpse the cost of her success, the meetings she missed, the moments she outsourced, the loneliness that money and power had failed to insulate. The room felt smaller then, less like a corporate office and more like a confession booth, and when Claire finally sat, folding her hands the way Noah did, she made an offer Ethan hadn't imagined. Not discipline, not dismissal, but flexibility, respect, and an acknowledgement that what he had given her son mattered. Ethan left that meeting dazed, the world tilted slightly off its axis, and when he returned to the executive floor that night, Noah was already there, waiting, his face lighting up when he saw Ethan as if nothing else in the building could compete with that simple reunion. Neither of them knew yet how far the ripple would travel, how a janitor's pause and a boy's question would begin to rearrange priorities in a place built on efficiency. But as they leaned over the board again, the city glowing beyond the glass, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted, not loudly or dramatically, but in the quiet, stubborn way that real change always begins. The change did not arrive with applause or press releases, but with mornings that felt lighter and evenings that no longer carried the same hollow weight, and Ethan noticed it first in himself before he saw it anywhere else. He slept better, laughed more easily with Lily at the breakfast table, and walked into Hale dynamics each night with a posture that no longer folded inward, because somewhere along the line he had stopped thinking of himself as a man passing through and started understanding that presence alone could matter. Claire Hale kept her word in ways that went far beyond policy updates, quietly restructuring her schedule so she left before the building emptied, arriving not as a distracted executive, but as Noah's mother, kneeling beside his chair to ask real questions, and waiting long enough to hear the answers. And though the company never advertised it, people began to notice that the CEO stayed late in common spaces now, that she spoke to receptionists by name, that she lingered instead of rushing, as if the building itself had taught her something about what success cost when it went unchecked. Noah changed, too, in ways that could not be graphed or measured. He laughed louder, argued more confidently, and stopped shrinking into himself when conversations turned adult, because someone had finally shown him that his voice could redirect the room rather than echo off its walls. And when he introduced Ethan to others, he did not say the janitor, but my friend, a simple redefinition that carried more power than any title in the company. The chessboard remained in the break area, no longer folded away, and people began to sit, first out of curiosity, then out of genuine interest, discovering that slowing down did not weaken them, that listening did not diminish authority, and that sometimes the most important lessons came from places the org chart never mentioned. Ethan never took the promotion Claire offered, not because he lacked ambition, but because he finally understood his own. He wanted evenings with Lily, weekends without exhaustion, and a life that felt aligned rather than impressive. And when Claire asked him why, he answered honestly, telling her that being seen had taught him what he actually needed, and that knowledge felt like wealth he wasn't willing to trade. On a spring evening months later, the building hosted a small gathering. Nothing formal, just families and staff sharing food in a space once reserved for deadlines. And Ethan watched as Lily and Noah argued over a game they both insisted they had invented, their laughter bouncing off glass walls that no longer felt cold, while Claire stood nearby, not directing, not overseeing, simply watching, her expression soft in a way no quarterly report had ever inspired. No speeches were made, no lessons announced, yet everyone there understood something had ended and something else had begun, a quiet correction in how value was measured and where attention was placed. When the night wound down and people filtered out, Ethan lingered by the windows one last time, the city glowing below, and thought about how close he had come to walking past a boy who asked him to play, about how easy it would have been to remain invisible, and how heavy that choice would have been in hindsight. Stories like this are rarely about miracles or villains, he realized, but about pauses, about the seconds when someone chooses to stop, to listen, to kneel instead of towering over another human being. And as he gathered his things and turned off the lights, Ethan understood that the building had not changed because of new policies or leadership strategies, but because one child refused to accept being ignored and one tired man decided that kindness was worth the risk. In the end, nothing extraordinary happened, and that was the point. A janitor went to work, a CEO went home earlier, a boy found his voice, and a few people remembered how to see what had always been right in front of them, which was more than enough to call it a happy ending.